Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sara Spinks.
Welcome to today's episode. Today's topic is a difficult one. We're talking about the tragic case of Sara Sharif, the 10-year-old girl whose death has led to deep conversations about homeschooling and safeguarding vulnerable children in the UK. It's a deeply troubling case that has shaken the nation. Just to summarise, Sarah was found dead at her home in Surrey in August 2023. It emerged that she had been homeschooled and, crucially, that she was known to social services. Her case highlighted real significant gaps in the system regarding the oversight of children who aren't in mainstream education.
Absolutely, that's right. You know, one of the most pressing questions to emerge from this tragedy is how can we better protect children who are homeschooled, especially when they've had prior contact with social services? This isn't the first case where concerns have been raised, and I think what's becoming clear is that home education can sometimes create that hidden population of children, just slip through the cracks.
Absolutely. And there have been calls for tighter regulations and more robust checks. At present, parents in England aren't required to notify local authorities when they withdraw their children from school for home education. And that means that once a child is off the school roll, that regular monitoring may cease altogether unless social services are actively involved.
Yeah, and the government, has started to respond following Sara's case. There have been renewed calls to create a national register for homeschooled children. Something child protection advocates have been pushing for years, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely.
Such a register would ensure, that local authorities know exactly how many children are being homeschooled and, more importantly, can flag those who might be at risk.
And that's an essential step. But as we've seen, even having a register doesn't fully address the issue. There's also the question of home visits and welfare checks. A child may be known to social services, but if the contact, if it isn't, if it's not consistent, or if the home environment changes, we've got to think about all of these things and about, how do we ensure their safety?
And that ties directly, doesn't it, into safeguarding implications. Many professionals argue that families withdrawing children from school after social service involvement should trigger automatic safeguarding reviews and follows up. A sudden change like moving to home education, it can sometimes mask those ongoing issues within the household.
And that's such an important point. And that's one of the things that's been put forward, isn't it? That if there is social service involvement, you can't withdraw your child. And I think that makes a lot of sense. There's a delicate balance between respecting parents' rights to educate their children at home and ensuring that those same children aren't placed at risk. And I think it's also important to mention that the majority of homeschooling families do provide a safe and nurturing environment, but it's the small percentage of cases where abuse or neglect may be present that we need to address.
Yeah, and it isn't about vilifying homeschooling. Even just over the holidays, I was talking to a very lovely couple who'd had to withdraw their son, who was 15, due to severe mental health issues, and that was the right and proper thing for their child at that time. But it's about strengthening that protective net. One of the proposals being discussed is to give local authorities greater power to conduct welfare checks at homeschooled households. And I'm sure families that have withdrawn their children for the right reasons would welcome those, particularly if the child has been previously known to child protection services. I think that's an absolute essential.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in countries, some countries like, for instance, Germany, home education is outright banned. In the UK, we've traditionally taken a more hands-off approach, but cases like Sarah's have raised the question of whether that approach is outdated in terms of safeguarding.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a shift happening. After Sarah's death, there's been cross-party support for reform. The idea is that if a child has had significant contact with social services, withdrawing them from school should not happen without official oversight and continued engagement.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. One of the lessons here is the need for better communication between schools, local authorities and social services. And schools are often the front line in identifying early signs of abuse or neglect. And when that link is severed, the risk grows.
Absolutely. I felt for that head teacher of the school that Sarah had been in. What a terrible situation. And as a former head, that, I had utter sympathy that you couldn't have eyes on. And I think that's why safeguarding professionals have been advocating for a more unified approach where education and child protection go hand in hand. It could mean mandatory reporting from schools if a vulnerable child is withdrawn, ensuring that, the local authorities follow up with regular check-ins.
Yeah, but of course, one thing we haven't talked about is you've got to have that system behind to be able to effectively do that do that effectively, rather. Yeah. So I think the other key takeaway is the importance of listening to children, and in some cases, children do express their fears, but if those voices aren't taken seriously or acted upon, the consequences can be devastating.
Exactly. And the wider public can also play a role by being vigilant and reporting concerns if they notice anything worrying in their communities. Safeguarding is, as we know, everyone's responsibility.
It is. So really, wrapping it up, I think the most important point to make is that Sarah's tragic death, it's got to lead to meaningful change as we review that case. And whether that's through a national register, enhanced welfare checks, or improved interagency collaboration. And I would say that's where we've spoken about it before on this podcast, that joined up multi-agency working where you are actually working cases together rather than just taking a role in working a case. We owe it really to Sarah's memory to strengthen the system and prevent future tragedies.